the first thing I noticed about the Interstellar Academy was the ventilation system. Not the three moons hanging behind the glass dome like a painting someone forgot to finish. Not the 47 species of cadet moving through the welcome hall in their pressed uniforms, trailing light and noise, and the particular smell of civilizations that had never once feared their own air. The vents. Wide filtration mouths set into the ceiling at inconsistent intervals, pulling harder on the eastern side than the western, which meant this planet pushed something through its atmosphere that the architecture was quietly managing, and no one in this building thought to mention in the orientation packet. I filed it, moved on. My name is Mara Voss. I am 19 years old. I was born on Cadets Roman 4, which the galactic census classifies as a Class 9 hostile biosphere, uninhabitable confirmed sapient presence, reason unknown. The reason is not unknown. The reason is that humans are extraordinarily difficult to kill, and the ones who live on Cadets Roman 4 stopped being surprised by that somewhere around the third generation. I am the fourth. The welcome address was delivered by Commandant Thresh, a Velhari 7 feet of bioluminescent dignity in a dress uniform that probably cost more than my entire childhood habitat. He spoke about honor, legacy, the sacred covenant of the Academy, and the 41-year tradition of excellence that Cohort Aurum represented. I was counting the exits. There were 6. 4 standard, 1 maintenance access behind the eastern speaker platform, 1 emergency egress above the main stage that Thresh was probably not aware could be reached from the third support strut if you had any upper body strength at all. I noted all of them not because I planned to use them, but because not noting them felt like leaving money on the floor. Some habits do not care what planet you are standing on. I was assigned to Cohort Aurum. Old Cohort, the best of the incoming class, hand-selected from the top performance records across 40 systems. I stood in the assignment line, heard my name called, and assumed the clerk had pulled the wrong file. I came from a planet the census thinks is empty. I submitted my academy application without a letter of recommendation because every person I might have asked is dead. The fact that I was standing in this atrium at all was, according to my own acceptance letter, statistically anomalous. That is one way to put it. I crossed the hall to the Cohort Aurum gathering point, and I felt them before I saw them. Not a psionic thing, a pressure thing. The specific atmospheric change that happens when a group of people who have spent their entire lives being the most impressive person in every room they have entered suddenly occupies a single space. It has a density to it, a gravitational pull toward itself. Cadet First Drevani Sal introduced himself within 4 seconds of my arrival, which told me he was the kind of person who understood that timing is a form of statement. He was tall, built like something that had been engineered for dominance and then given manners as an afterthought. He had the easy confidence of a man whose threat assessments have always confirmed what he already believed about himself. He looked at my file on his personal display. His expression did something very small and very diplomatic. I had seen that expression before, on a Cadets Roman 4 predator called a maw crawler right before it decided I was worth recalculating. The maw crawler had been wrong. I noted that Drevani had the same problem and said nothing. My roommate, Ensign Tail, found me 20 minutes later in the corridor outside our quarters. He was Forian, 6-limbed. His empathic sensitivity ran through his entire exoskeletal surface, which meant every interaction he had was a full-body event. He was vibrating at what I would later learn was his anxiety frequency, which turned out to be most of his frequencies. He wanted to warn me about something. He used the word traditions. His translator clipped on it slightly, the kind of clip that happens when the word being translated is carrying more weight than its surface definition allows. I did not ask him to elaborate. I already knew what traditions looked like when they were being offered to someone the group had decided was the designated outside element. They looked the same on every world, just different lighting. That night, I read my own academy file from the terminal in our quarters. I read it the way I read everything, which is front to back with the specific attention of someone who has learned that the details other people consider minor are usually the ones that will matter. Under threat assessment, low, physical metrics within standard human range, recommend psychological evaluation regarding Deathworld acclimation. Under special skills, none identified. Under planet of origin, Carathroman 4, Class 9 hostile biosphere. Survival to recruitment age statistically anomalous. I closed the file. At the very bottom, beneath the official Academy assessment, there was a single note from my field recruiter. He had written it in plain text, no formatting, like a thought he did not bother to dress up. She was the only applicant from Carathroman 4 in Academy history. She was also the only person who submitted her application without a letter of recommendation, because everyone she would have asked is dead. I read it twice, looked at the wall for a moment, then I closed the terminal and went to sleep. The bad thing, whatever shape it was going to take in this place, would wait. It always did, and when it arrived, I would already be rested. That was Carathroman 4 Rule 1, and it was the only rule that had never once failed me. 3 days into the Academy, Dravani delivered the invitation personally. I respected that. A man who handles his own business instead of sending a messenger is a man who understands what he is doing and has decided to own it. That is not nothing. I filed it under useful information. He came to the training yard in the early morning, when the light on this planet was still flat and gray, and the other cadets were running drills on the far field. He walked toward me with the same ease he did everything, like the ground was cooperating, like it always had. He told me about the blooding rite. Every new transfer into Cohort Aurum faced it. The cohort tested the newcomer, all of them together, in the arena. It was technically non-lethal. Technically. The Academy permitted it because the cohort's record was 43 wins and 0 losses, and because the administration had decided that a ritual which produced no fatalities was merely a vigorous tradition rather than a systemic problem. The distinction is the kind that makes sense when you write it from behind a desk. I looked at him for a moment. I asked him if there was a standard start time or if I got to choose. Something moved across his face. Not offense. Something closer to recalculation. He told me the arena would be ready in 4 days. He turned and walked back across the training yard, and I watched his shoulders for the slight tension that would tell me whether I had rattled him. There was a little, not much, but a little. I noted it and said nothing. Tail found me before lunch. He had been running his anxiety frequency since sunrise, and by midday it had escalated into what I can only describe as a full-body alarm system. He sat across from me in the dining hall and told me everything he knew about the blooding rite in one long, breathless stream, the way Forians deliver bad news, all of it at once so it is over faster. The previous transfer who faced it had spent 4 months in the medical facility. The one before that had appealed to the Academy Arbitration Board and requested an exemption on grounds of psychological trauma. I asked him what happened to the one who appealed. 3 months in medical, Tail said, and then quietly, and the cohort never fully accepted him. I nodded. Tail had handed me the 2 most useful pieces of information I would receive in those 4 days, and he had no idea he had done it. First, medical facility, not the mortuary, which meant they were pulling their force, which meant this was a performance of dominance, not an exercise in actual harm. Second, the one who fought lasted longer than the one who appealed. Different problem entirely, easier problem. I spent the next 4 days not training. I slept 10 hours each night. I ate 3 full meals. I sat in the atrium in the late afternoons and watched the cohort move through the common space, which sounds passive and is in fact the most active thing I know how to do. Watching is not a rest state. Watching is information collection, and information is the only resource that does not run out when the environment turns against you. I watched how each cadet moved, weight distribution. The slight lean that precedes a commitment to motion. The particular way each species handles ambient sound, the microflinch or the stillness, because a person's relationship to unexpected noise tells you everything about their threat conditioning. I watched how they grouped and regrouped, who deferred to whom not out of rank but out of habit, which is always more honest. Cadet Yes was the third-ranked member of the cohort. Dravosi. His psionic rating was listed in the Academy records as exceptional, which in Dravosi terms means he could perceive intent and suppress it, a combination that in a combat scenario would translate to knowing what you were going to do and making it harder to do it. He had the relaxed posture of someone who has never needed to be the fastest person in the room, because he already knows what the fastest person in the room is going to do before they do it. He caught me watching him on the third day and smiled. Slow, satisfied, the smile of a man who had read my watching as anxiety and filed me accordingly. I let him keep that. The night before the rite, Tails sat on the edge of his sleeping platform and asked me if I was afraid. I thought about it, not as a performance of consideration, but actually. The question deserved an honest answer and Tail deserved the person who gave it. On Karathroman 4, I was afraid every day until I was approximately 12 years old. Then something happened, not a single event but a gradual private negotiation between my body and my brain, and they reached an agreement. Fear costs energy. Energy on Karathroman 4 is finite and precious, and spent wrong it gets you dead before whatever is chasing you even closes the distance. So the agreement was this: feel what is useful, discard what is not. Fear is not useful when the threat is already confirmed, and the only remaining variable is response. After that, I stopped being afraid of things that were already happening. I became afraid only of things I had not yet identified, because those were the ones that could still surprise me. I told Tail, afraid of what specifically? He opened his mouth, closed it. He did not have an answer, and I think the absence of the answer scared him more than any answer could have. I told him to sleep. He did not sleep. I could hear his anxiety frequency cycling through the dark for a long time after the lights went down. I lay on my back and stared at the ceiling and did what I always do in the hours before something difficult. I sorted through what I knew and what I did not know, and placed the unknowns in a line where I could look at them without letting them crowd each other. 50 cadets, top of their respective species, classes, disciplines, a psionic suppressor at center, a formation they had practiced, a space they knew and I did not. None of this was the version of difficult I had learned difficult from. I knew what I was going to do. The sequence was already assembled. It had assembled itself the way these things always did, quietly, without drama, while I was doing something else entirely. I closed my eyes. Somewhere in the dark of the room, Tail was still vibrating. I was already asleep. The arena smelled like a burning season. Not exactly. Not the specific char of Karathroman 4 undergrowth during the dry months when the fire beetles swarmed, and anything that could not outrun the front edge of the burn did not make it to the wet season. Not that precise, but close enough that my body registered it before my brain did, and my pulse did something it had not done in years, a single hard kick against my sternum like a door being tested. Then I sorted through it, composite flooring, overhead lights running hot, crowd heat bouncing off the bowl architecture of the space, not fire, just warmth concentrated by engineering. My pulse settled. I walked in. The arena was built for spectacle in the way that most institutions build their spaces for spectacle, which is to say it was built to make the people inside it feel that what was happening here mattered enormously and would be remembered. High ceiling. Tiered seating already filling with cadets from other cohorts, and a handful of staff who were present in the capacity of official observers, which is the institutional word for witnesses. I spent 4 seconds walking the space with my eyes. Sight lines first. The bowl design created 3 natural blind zones. Behind the far support column, the northeast quarter where 2 overhead lights were casting overlapping shadows, and a depression in the floor near the western wall where the composite gave slightly, about a centimeter, which would cause anyone moving fast across it to check their footing without knowing why. The structural column in the center of the space was positioned slightly off true, not centered, which meant cadets using it as a reference anchor would naturally drift 2 degrees left of where they thought they were. Cover next. Hard cover. The column, the scorer's platform at the south end. Soft cover. The crowd barrier, which would absorb exactly nothing but would create hesitation in anyone trained to avoid civilian-adjacent spaces. Exit points. The main arch I had entered through, a maintenance door on the eastern wall currently standing open, and the access corridor behind the scorer's platform. The maintenance door was the one that mattered. Open doors tell you what the people who opened them expected to happen in the room. They expected this to be brief. They were correct, but not in the direction they were planning for. The cohort was already arranged when I stepped to the center marker. 50 cadets. The formation was beautiful in the way that formally trained things are beautiful, each element in its correct position, the geometry expressing a logic that was clean and considered, and had clearly been refined across 43 previous applications. Dravani at the point, center front. Yes, at interior center, surrounded on 4 sides by Dravosi flankers who would keep him stable if the psionic output cost him equilibrium. The outer ring arranged in a stagger pattern that would prevent me from finding a gap by simply moving laterally. It was a good formation. It was a formation designed for a person who would move in response to them. A person who would react, adjust, absorb pressure, and exhaust themselves against the organized mass of 50 trained combatants pressing from multiple angles until something gave. I was not that person. I looked at the formation for exactly as long as it took me to confirm what I already knew, and then I moved before the start signal. The start signal is for people who need time to decide. Yes was 30 feet away and positioned at interior center, which meant reaching him required passing through or around the outer ring and the second ring. The outer ring would react to lateral movement. They were conditioned for it, so I did not move laterally. I moved directly forward at a pace the outer ring did not expect because nothing in their 43 previous encounters had ever come at them instead of retreating to create distance. The cadet at the point of the outer ring had exactly enough time to register that I was inside his expected response range before I was past him entirely, using his own surprise as the margin I needed. Second ring. 2 cadets, Dravosi both, flanking the corridor that led to Yes's position. They began to close. I went between them at the exact moment of their commitment, which is always the slowest moment of any closing movement, the instant between decision and completion when the body is fully committed and cannot reverse. Yes saw me coming. His eyes went wide and his psionic field expanded. I could feel it the way you feel a pressure change, the air thickening around my own intentions. And I knew in approximately 1 more second he would be able to read what I was going to do clearly enough to telegraph it to Dravani, and the formation would reorganize around that information. 1 more second was 1 second more than I needed. The pressure point on a Dravosi that produces a clean neural interruption without lasting harm sits at the juncture of the secondary cortical nerve cluster, just below the left temporal ridge. The information came from a Carathroman 4 medical text that my mother had traded 3 months of protein stores to acquire. Because on Carathroman 4 you learn what you can about whatever you might one day need to know about, and you do not wait until you need it to start learning. I applied the correct amount of pressure at the correct location for approximately 1.5 seconds. Yes folded, not hard, not hurt, just offline. His body went to the floor with the specific quality of something that had simply stopped receiving instructions. The psionic field collapsed. 40 seconds of interruption minimum, probably closer to 55. 55 seconds is a long time. Dravani committed. I had been waiting for it and I let him come because the worst thing you can do to a trained fighter is take away their ability to commit. It is the one thing they practice for, the moment of full extension, and if you rob them of it without meeting it, they lose more than the exchange. They lose their orientation to the space. He came at me with everything the Academy had given him, which was considerable, and I met it with everything Carath Roman IV had made of me, which is a different taxonomy entirely. The Academy teaches you to fight the opponent in front of you. Carath Roman IV teaches you to fight the situation, of which the opponent is only one variable. Dravani was fighting me. I was fighting the geometry of the room, the weight of his momentum, the 2 seconds before the outer ring could reorganize, and the specific angle at which a body of his mass and speed will redirect with the minimum force applied to the correct joint. He went down, not hard, confused in the particular way of someone whose body has just executed a motion that their training has no catalog for. I was already moving. What followed was not a fight. It was a sequence of decisions, each one approximately 1 second long, each one producing a result that opened the next decision. I did not think about any of them individually. My body ran a program that my mind had stopped writing consciously somewhere around age 13 and had simply trusted to run since then. 12 seconds. 28 seconds. 41 seconds. 47 cadets on the floor of the arena in various states of non-critical interruption, groaning, blinking. One cadet was sitting up and looking at his own hands as if checking whether they were still his. 3 remained standing. They were standing in a loose triangle formation, but it was not the organized triangle of tactical intent. It was the triangle of 3 people who had ended up near each other by accident and were now finding the coincidence useful. I stopped moving. I looked at them. They looked at me. Something happened in their eyes, all 3 of them, a shift that I recognized not because I had produced it before but because I had seen it before on Carath Roman IV, in the eyes of things that had recalculated. The expression is not fear. Fear comes before recalculation. This was what comes after. The moment something looks at you and understands that you are a category it does not have a word for. I took 2 steps toward them. They stepped back, 1 step, synchronized without intending to be. I stopped, stood still, waited. They looked at each other, a long moment, the kind of moment that contains a conversation without words. Then all 3 of them sat down. Not fell, not collapsed. Sat deliberately on the arena floor, which is the body's way of saying, I am removing myself from this equation. It is the most honest thing a person can do in that moment, and I respected it completely. The crowd was silent. Not the silence of shock, though that was part of it. The silence of an audience that has been watching a type of story and has just realized they were watching a different type of story entirely, and is now recalibrating which type of story they are in. I stood in the center of the arena and looked up into that silence and felt nothing triumphant, nothing satisfied. I had done this math 1,000 times on Carath Roman IV, different variables every time, same equation. I had never once finished it and felt the thing stories had told me I was supposed to feel. I noticed a stylus that had rolled off the scorer's platform at the southern end of the space. Cheap composite, the kind that sat on every scoring table in every institution in the galaxy, functional and anonymous and completely ordinary. I walked to it, picked it up, held it for a moment. Then I put it in my pocket and walked toward the exit arch. No one moved to stop me. The maintenance door on the eastern wall was still open. Commandant Thresh ran the inquiry in a room that smelled like recycled air and institutional patience. He sat across a table from me with his bioluminescent markings cycling through what I had learned was his thinking pattern, a slow pulse in the upper register of his visible frequency range, like a heartbeat that was taking its time. The official inquiry lasted 40 minutes. He asked careful questions in the way that careful people ask careful questions when they already have the information they need and are deciding what to do with it. 47 cadets assessed post-event. No critical injuries. 2 fractured ribs, one belonging to a cadet menhir whose bone density I had miscalculated, because I had read his species registration as Kolvari when he was a Kolvari-Drav mixed heritage, which is a different bone matrix entirely, and I told Thresh this directly, and said I was sorry for the miscalculation. One dislocated shoulder. Various bruised dignities, which Thresh did not list in the report, but which were legible in every face I had passed in the corridor on my way to this room. Thresh asked me to walk him through my strategic reasoning. I told him I did not have a name for it. It was just what I did when something was moving toward me with intent. He asked if I had received specialized training, combat instruction, tactical conditioning. I looked at him for a moment, thought about how to explain Karath Roman IV to a man who had spent his career in an institution built on the premise that excellence is something you cultivate through instruction. I asked him, trained by what exactly? He held very still. The bioluminescent pulse in his upper markings slowed to a frequency I had not seen from him before. He looked at me the way someone looks at a thing they have been trying to fit into a known category and have just accepted will not fit. He said, "The review board will classify this as an exceptional performance under the provisions of Academy Code 7-4, which covers unanticipated outcome events during traditional cohort exercises." I said, "All right." He said that classification requires a follow-up evaluation, physical, cognitive, psychological, with specific reference to Deathworld acclimation. I said, "All right." He looked at his desk, then back at me, then, with the specific quality of a man setting down something he had been carrying in an official capacity and picking up something more honest. "In 41 years, I have graduated 312 cadets that I consider genuinely dangerous. I do not mean trained. I mean dangerous in the fundamental sense, capable of finding a solution in conditions that have no solution." I waited. He said, "You are the first one who arrived that way." The room was quiet. The recycled air moved through the vents above us with the soft mechanical patience of systems that do not care what is being said beneath them. I asked him what he intended to do with that. He said, "That is precisely what I am trying to determine." I respected him for it. A man who admits the boundaries of his own comprehension is a man worth paying attention to, and I paid attention. The formal inquiry concluded, I stood to leave. Thresh said, without looking up from his display, "Voss, the Blooding Right has a 43-0 record. The board will be discussing whether to continue it." I paused at the door, thought about the 43 cadets who had come before me, the ones who fought, the ones who appealed, the ones who spent months in the medical facility and then rejoined a cohort that had already decided what they were. I told him the right was not the problem. I left before he could ask me what I meant, because I did not entirely know yet, and I prefer to be precise. Drevani was in the corridor, not waiting in the organized way of someone who had planned to be there, standing in the particular way of someone who had ended up there by the logic of needing somewhere to be and finding the corridor the most honest option. He looked at me with his face set in a neutral expression that was working harder than it appeared to be working. I expected the particular kind of conversation that happens after one person has decisively ended something the other person was confident about. I had run those conversations before. They go one of two directions, and the direction is determined in the first 3 seconds by whether the person asks you a question or makes a statement. He asked me a question. He asked how old I was the first time I fought something that could actually kill me. 7, I said. It was a pack animal, Karath fauna. I do not know the galactic classification. The Karath name for it translates approximately to ground shredder. He was quiet for a long moment, long enough that I began to calculate whether he was processing or retreating. Then he said, "I have never fought anything that could actually kill me." He said it without decoration. No self-pity in it, no performance, just a fact, handed across the space between us like something he had been carrying and had decided to set down where someone could see it. I did not know what to do with that. It was not a weapon, and it was not a peace offering, and it did not fit in any category I had a name for. I stood with it for a moment, and then put it somewhere I also did not have a name for, which was becoming a recurring theme in this building. I told him, "Then you have been very fortunate, or your world is very kind." He said, "I used to think fortunate. Now I am not certain it is the same thing." He walked away. I watched him go and noticed that his shoulders were carrying something different now, a shift in the weight distribution that had nothing to do with the physical events of the arena. Something had changed in the architecture of how he understood himself in relation to space. I did not know yet whether it would make him better or worse, but it had changed. Tail was in our quarters when I returned. He was vibrating on a frequency I had not seen from him before, and I had by that point cataloged approximately 9 of his frequencies. This one was somewhere between awe and the kind of distress that comes not from something bad happening, but from something your model of the world could not have predicted. He asked, "Did you know you were going to win?" I sat on my sleeping platform, thought about the question honestly. I told him I did not think about it in those terms. He said, "What terms did you think about it in?" I said, "I thought about what the most efficient path through the problem looked like, and then I walked it." Tail vibrated harder, all 6 limbs. He sat with that for a long time, and then he said, very quietly, "That is the most frightening thing I have ever heard anyone say." I told him I was going to take that as a compliment. He said it was, mostly, and also genuinely frightening. I found the official commendation report on my terminal that evening. The Academy had processed the inquiry results with admirable speed. The language was precise and careful in the way of documents written by people who understand that the document will be read by multiple parties with competing interests. Exceptional tactical cognition, cross-species combat adaptability, demonstration of advanced situational assessment under high-pressure conditions. Nowhere in the report did it say, "We have been training people for 43 matches to become what she already is." Nowhere did it say the curriculum had been running a calibration error. Nowhere did it say that the institution built to measure excellence had spent 3 days measuring the wrong things and had required 47 cadets on a composite floor to understand the discrepancy. I read it twice, folded the printout, put it in my footlocker beside the stylus from the arena. Then I found a note that had been slipped under the door. No name on it, Dravani's handwriting, 3 sentences. The right has a 43 and 0 record. You are now 43 and 1. Some of us have been discussing what that means. I read it twice. I did not know what it meant either. I knew it meant something. The morning after, I woke up and ate breakfast and went to tactical theory. This is not interesting as a sequence of events. It was, to me, the most important part of everything that happened. On Carathroman 4, you do not perform recovery. You simply continue because the alternative is giving the environment a pause it will fill with something worse. So I continued. I ate the meal. I attended the class. I sat in a chair in a room full of 50 cadets who had been on the arena floor the day before, and I opened my course materials. The cohort arranged itself differently. Not fearfully. I want to be precise about this because the distinction matters enormously to me, and I think it matters in the way that things matter when they determine the shape of everything that comes after. Fearfully would have been worse, in some ways, than the original hostility. Fear produces a kind of distance that calcifies into permanent separation. A person who is afraid of you will not learn from you. They will study you from across the room and build their model of you from that distance, and the model will never be accurate because it is built from far away. This was not that. The space the cohort gave me was the space you give something you have been reading wrong and are in the process of rereading. An adjustment. An opening of the original assessment to new information. I had seen it happen on Carathroman 4 between humans and the fauna they eventually learned to coexist with. The slow recalibration of relationship that happens when both parties survive long enough to discover that fear was only the first chapter. Dravani sat next to me, not beside me with the self-conscious quality of a gesture, not with any announcement or acknowledgement. He simply sat down in the adjacent seat as if it were the most logical place to sit, which, by some geometry I was only beginning to understand, it apparently was. We did not speak during the class. At the end, as the cohort was filing out, he said, "You assessed yes before anyone else moved." I said, "He was the variable with the widest effect radius." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "None of us have ever thought about it that way." I said, "You think about it in terms of strength and rank order." He said, "Yes, we have always addressed the strongest first." I said, "The strongest is usually also the slowest to fall. If you neutralize the element that multiplies everyone else's capability, strength becomes just strength." He looked at me, not the recalculating look of the first day, something else. A look I did not have a file for yet and was beginning to suspect I would need to make a new one. He said, "Where did you learn that?" I said, "It is not something you learn. It is something you figure out when the alternative is dying." He nodded. He walked away. I noticed, as he walked, that his stride had changed in a way that is difficult to describe precisely, but that I would say was the stride of someone who had just discovered a door in a wall they thought was solid. Commandant Thresh called me to his office 2 days later, and this time the door was closed and the administrative register was entirely absent. He sat across from me without his display screen between us. His bioluminescent markings were running their thinking pattern, slow and steady. He looked like a man who had spent 2 days arriving at a conversation and was now committed to having it. He said, "The blooding right has been suspended pending a full review." I said I heard. He said, "The review board is divided. Half of them believe the right should be permanently discontinued on the grounds that it is a hazing mechanism with no genuine educational value. The other half believe it served an assessment function that we do not currently have a replacement for." I said, "What do you believe?" He considered. The markings pulsed. Then, "I believe the right was designed to answer a question, and we kept running it long after we stopped being honest about what question we were actually asking." I asked him what question it was actually asking. He said, "Can this person survive something they did not choose and did not prepare for and could not opt out of? And if so, how?" The room was quiet for a moment. I said, "That is a reasonable question." He said, "It is the most important question I know how to ask. I am simply no longer certain that putting one person against 50 constitutes asking it." I sat with that for a moment, thought about Cadets Roman 4, about all the ways the environment asked exactly that question every day without any institution designing the test or any observer recording the outcome. Thought about all the people who had answered it correctly and were still dead. I told him, the question is valid. The structure was built assuming everyone who walked into the arena came from the same kind of world. It was testing for a specific kind of resilience, the kind you develop in controlled adversity. He said, "And you developed a different kind." I said, "I developed the kind that Cadets Roman 4 makes when it is not trying to make anything." His marking stilled for a moment, then resumed slower. He said, "That is the most honest thing anyone has said to me in this office in a very long time." I went back to the cohort. Tail found me in the common room that evening and vibrated with the particular frequency that meant he had information. He was excited to deliver and was attempting to calibrate the delivery to avoid overwhelming me. He told me the cohort had a name for me. I asked him what it was. "Kareth," he said, "just that, not my name, the planet. The way you would name a significant weather event after the geography that produced it, so that, when you heard the name, you would remember the conditions that created the thing you were dealing with." I said, "That is strange." He said, "On my world, We name dangerous things after their origin because it is important to remember that they were made by something real, that the environment that produced them was real, that the thing itself is not random or impossible, just the product of conditions most people have not experienced. I held that for a while. I said the name quietly to myself, Karath, testing the weight of it. It felt like someone else's name. It felt exactly right. I went to my quarters that evening and took the stylus out of my footlocker, just a scorer's instrument, the kind that sits on every table in every organized space in the galaxy, functional, completely ordinary. I knew why I had picked it up. I had known since the arena and had been letting the knowing sit in the background where it did not need to be examined until it was ready. On Karath Roman 4, when the environment goes hostile in that particular way it has of going hostile, all at once and from multiple directions and without the courtesy of a warning, you learn a thing that no one can teach you and that does not show up in any assessment metric. You learn to grab onto something small, something ordinary, a tool, a familiar object, a piece of the world that is not currently trying to kill you. Not because it helps with the immediate problem. It does not. The stylus does not stop the threat. The ordinary object does not change the situation. It reminds your hands that ordinary things still exist, that there is a world on the other side of this moment where styluses roll off tables, and that is the only problem, where the worst thing happening is that your pen has moved from where you left it, where the scale of difficulty is something manageable and human-sized, and not trying to swallow you whole. That is what the stylus was. That is what it had always been. I held it for a while, then I put it on my desk, not in the footlocker, on the desk where it could be seen, ordinary, in the open. I opened a log file on my terminal. The Academy required cadets to keep mission and reflection logs. I had not written one. I did not think in logs. I thought in assessments, in lists of knowns and unknowns, in sequences of decisions and their outcomes. But I opened a blank file and sat with it for a long time. The cursor blinked. The recycled air moved through the vents above me. I typed one line. I closed the file. In the next room, Tail had finally stopped vibrating. His breathing had settled into something regular. He was asleep, for the first time since I had arrived, without any anxiety frequency running underneath it. I turned off the desk light. The stylus sat in the dark on my desk, ordinary and small, and exactly where I had left it. I went to sleep. The bad thing, whatever shape it was going to take next in this place, would wait. It always did. And when it came, I would already be rested. That was Karath Roman 4 Rule 1. It had never once failed me. It was beginning to feel, in this strange institution on this planet that was not mine, like it might not start now.